There are stories people tell around campfires, whispers in the cold black of night, tales meant to frighten but easily dismissed in the light of day. But this one's different. It didn't come from a ghost story or some old legend. It came from a man, rugged and hardened by the wilderness, who came back from the forest a changed person. He emerged shaken, broken, haunted by something he claimed was unlike any creature on earth. And while the locals might brush it off, mark it down as the ramblings of a traumatized hunter, those who've seen the scars on his body and the fear in his eyes know better. He isn't lying. There's something in those woods, something alive, and it's playing a twisted game with anyone who dares step foot into its territory. Before we dive into this tale of horror and survival, where the line between hunter and prey blurs into a deadly game, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more spine-chilling stories like this one. Click that bell to stay updated on the latest, because these stories are just the beginning of the strange, the unknown, and the terrifying. The hunter's name was Ray Jensen. He wasn't just any hunter. He was one of those seasoned outdoorsmen who could read the land like a book. Years spent tracking wolves and bears, his senses were honed to a razor's edge, every sound and broken twig telling him something about the life around him. Ray lived in a cabin on the outskirts of the small town of Elkford, a place nestled in a mountain valley thick with pine and a fog that hung low over the treetops. Locals knew him well, and when people began to disappear, Ray was the one they called. It started with hikers. First, it was a pair of tourists who had wandered a bit too far off the marked trails. They were young, reckless, and people figured they'd just gotten lost. But when two more people vanished, this time seasoned campers who'd spent half their lives in the woods, folks started talking. By the time Ray was called in, 6 people had gone missing. The forest had turned into a haunted place, silent and dark. Locals kept close to town, whispering about something out there, something that tore through the underbrush and left only scraps behind. Ray had dealt with wolves before, even the rare mountain lion. But when he set out into those trees, rifle strapped to his back, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. The first signs of trouble were claw marks, thick, deep gouges in the bark of an ancient pine. The slashes were too wide, too long to be any bear. He found scattered remnants of shredded clothing hanging from branches, blood smeared across rocks, and then a symbol. It was burned into the wood, a strange spiral of jagged lines and dots, something not made by any forest animal. The marks had a metallic sheen, almost like they'd been etched with molten metal that had cooled and hardened. Ray crouched down, studying the shards of metal scattered around, their edges gleaming sharply even in the dim light filtering through the trees. He reached out to touch one, only to pull his hand back quickly. The shard was strangely warm, almost as if it pulsed with life of its own. What kind of animal leaves metallic shards? The thought gnawed at him as he pressed on, his steps careful and measured. As the forest grew thicker, darker, he noticed an unnatural quietness. No birds, no rustling leaves, just a suffocating silence. And then he saw it, what looked like the remains of something huge, twisted, and burnt lying in a clearing. A mangled wreck of metal, dark and sprawling, half buried in the earth and overgrown with vines. He approached cautiously, rifle raised, and circled it. The ship, if that's what it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its surface was smooth yet fractured, as if it had been torn apart from the inside. Strange symbols were etched along the hull, the same ones he'd seen burned into the trees. He couldn't make sense of it, but as he circled, something moved within the shadows cast by the twisted wreckage. A figure. It shifted, something hulking and hunched, moving with a fluidity that was unnatural, even graceful. Ray's heart raced as he tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes fixed on the thing lurking in the ship's ruins. He could see parts of it now. A long, dark shape, spindly limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, skin gleaming a slick, wet green under the fading daylight. Its head tilted slightly, a reflective surface where its face should be, and Ray realized with horror that it was watching him. Ray lifted his rifle and fired, the crack of the gunshot shattering the silence. The bullet struck the creature, but it didn't fall. It let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Ray's bones. And then, faster than he could react, it moved. It was on him, slashing through the air, leaving a searing pain along his arm as he fell back, clutching his rifle tightly. He scrambled to his feet, watching as the creature retracted back, its posture calm and eerily controlled. Ray could feel the blood trickling down his arm, but he didn't dare look away. Instead, he began to back up slowly, his eyes locked onto the alien's empty, reflective face, his breath shallow and fast. It was toying with him. He could see it in the way it moved, calculated, precise. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a game. And Ray was the prey. Ray's boots dug into the wet earth as he staggered forward, a trail of blood and broken branches marking his path. The alien's mimicry had started as faint whispers, almost like echoes, but it was growing louder, more convincing, drawing him further into the forest's shadowy depths. The voices weren't just random anymore. They were choosing words, sentences, even tones that struck at Ray's memories, his deepest fears, and his lingering regrets. It was studying him, adapting its tactics to unravel his mind. He knew this wasn't just some mindless creature out for a kill. It was calculating, strategic, and worst of all, it enjoyed the chase. Every time he stopped to catch his breath, it seemed to retreat, waiting just beyond the edge of sight, letting him think he'd bought himself a moment's peace. And just when he'd think he was alone, it would strike again. Not physically, but psychologically, calling to him in voices that made his skin crawl. It was more than just mimicry, it was intelligence. A cold, detached intelligence that seemed to take pleasure in his suffering. Ray thought of every predator he'd ever hunted, every creature he'd tracked. This thing was different, a life form from some unknown corner of the universe that seemed to savor the kill as an art form. Ray's survival instincts urged him to turn back, to find the way out of the maze of trees and shadows. But his pride and his duty as a hunter held him there, his pulse hammering as he pressed forward, clinging to the slim hope that he could defeat it. He felt its eyes on him, watching his every move. It knew him, understood him, and had begun a sick, twisted game where he was the prey. Hours passed, maybe more. Time had lost all meaning in this relentless pursuit. Ray stumbled across a stretch of land where the trees parted, a natural clearing where moonlight spilled onto the ground in silvery pools. The air felt different here, almost sacred, like it was some kind of natural battleground. His gut told him this was the place. If he was going to face this thing, it would be here. He wasn't running anymore. He'd make his final stand. He crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle cocked and ready, eyes scanning the darkness. His breath came in shallow gasps, every muscle tense, ready to spring. For several agonizing moments, there was silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves. But then, as if on cue, he heard it. A soft, familiar voice. "Ray, it's me. Please help." It was the voice of his daughter, who had passed years ago in a tragic accident. She had been young, her life cut short before she could see the world, and Ray had spent every day since haunted by the memory. He knew it couldn't be real, knew it was the creature, playing with his mind, probing his psyche for weaknesses, dragging him to the edge of his sanity. But the voice was so heartbreakingly accurate. Every lilt, every inflection. "Daddy, don't leave me," the voice whispered, trembling, so vulnerable, so perfect. Ray clenched his jaw, feeling tears sting his eyes. He had to steel himself, remind himself it was a trap, a cruel trick from a monstrous hunter with a taste for the mind games. Suddenly, the voice changed. "You're going to die here, Ray." It was cold, emotionless, a direct statement meant to rattle him. Ray gritted his teeth, refusing to let it take control. He aimed his rifle into the darkness, finger hovering over the trigger. "Show yourself," he shouted, his voice raw with fury and desperation. "Come out and finish this." The silence that followed was suffocating, a thick, ominous stillness as if the entire forest was holding its breath. And then, with a slow, deliberate step, the creature emerged from the shadows. In the moonlight, Ray could see it clearly now. an alien form towering over him, limbs long and spindly but powerful, covered in smooth, glistening scales. Its face was a blank, reflective surface, like polished metal, showing Ray his own terrified reflection. Ray steadied his rifle, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He fired, the shot cracking through the night air. The bullet hit its mark, splattering thick, green fluid from the creature's torso. But it didn't fall. It let out a low, rumbling growl, an otherworldly sound that seemed to vibrate through Ray's bones, filling him with dread. It was hurt, but not defeated. And now it was angry. The creature lunged, moving faster than Ray could process, and he barely had time to throw himself to the side as it struck the ground where he'd been standing. Its claws raked through the earth, leaving deep gouges. Ray rolled, scrambling to his feet, but the alien was already advancing, its movements fluid, almost serpentine as it circled him. He fired again, but this time, the creature dodged, evading with an unnatural speed. In one swift motion, it was upon him, its claws slicing through his shoulder, ripping through muscle and sending a wave of searing pain down his arm. Ray cried out, stumbling backward, the rifle slipping from his grip as he clutched his bleeding arm. The creature stood over him, its blank face tilting as if studying him, assessing the damage it had inflicted. It was savoring his suffering, toying with him as a cat might with a wounded mouse. Ray felt his strength fading, his vision blurring. But as the creature leaned closer, he noticed something. An opening, a small, vulnerable patch on its chest where his last shot had torn through its armor. In a surge of desperate energy, he reached into his boot, pulling out his hunting knife. With a roar, he thrust the blade into the creature's exposed wound, pushing with every ounce of strength he had left. The alien let out a scream, a high-pitched, guttural wail that echoed through the trees, and its grip on him loosened. Ray staggered back, watching as it writhed, dark green ichor spilling from the wound. But even as it struggled, he could see it wasn't finished. It was adapting, adjusting, its wounds closing with alarming speed. Ray felt a sick realization settle over him. This thing wasn't like any predator he'd ever faced. It was built to survive, to heal, to keep fighting until its prey was utterly destroyed. Ray knew he couldn't kill it, not truly. His only chance was to escape, to put as much distance between himself and the creature as possible. Summoning the last of his strength, he turned and ran, stumbling through the forest, every step a struggle against the pain ripping through his body. Behind him, he could hear the creature giving chase, its heavy, methodical footsteps echoing through the night. Ray pushed himself harder, faster, weaving through the trees, praying he could reach the edge of the forest before his body gave out. The creature was relentless, closing in with each passing second. Just as Ray thought he couldn't go any farther, he saw it, the faint outline of the forest's edge, a glimmer of open ground just beyond the last row of trees. He threw himself forward, muscles burning, lungs screaming for air, and finally, he broke through, collapsing into the clearing just as dawn broke over the horizon. As he lay there, gasping for breath, he glanced back into the shadows. The creature had stopped at the edge of the trees, its metallic face catching the morning light, watching him with a dark, unsettling calm. It let out one last chilling growl before retreating into the shadows, vanishing as if it had never been there. Ray knew then that it had let him go, not because it couldn't catch him, but because it had wanted him to escape, to return with his tail. It was a warning, a seed of terror it had planted in him to take back to the human world. It wanted him to spread the fear, to make people think twice before venturing into the woods. Ray hadn't escaped. He was merely a messenger, a pawn in the creature's twisted game. When he made it back to town, Ray tried to tell people what he'd seen. But his story was met with skepticism, pity, and condescending nods. The town dismissed him as a man traumatized by a bear attack, left haunted by the isolation of the forest. He eventually stopped trying, retreating to his cabin on the outskirts, living as a man haunted by memories of an encounter no one believed. But the forest knew, and so did he. The creature was still out there, lurking, waiting, listening. And as Ray lay in bed at night, he could sometimes hear it calling, mimicking voices, echoing just at the edge of the woods. It was waiting, biding its time, preparing for the next victim foolish enough to venture into its territory. If you're ever in Elkford and find yourself near the edge of the forest, take heed of Ray's story. And if you hear a voice calling your name, especially a voice you recognize, do yourself a favor, turn back. Because in those woods, the predator isn't hunting for survival, it's hunting for fun. And that's the story of Ray's terrifying encounter deep within the forest. An alien predator with a taste for the hunt, and a mind games as deadly as its claws. Ray's warning lingers, a reminder that sometimes, the wilderness holds secrets beyond anything we could ever imagine. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with others who love a good horror tale. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We dive into the unknown, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the stories that seem impossible are the ones closest to the truth. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and as always, watch your back. You never know what's out there.